Your company has hours of Zoom recordings and training sessions, right? But nobody ever rereads them. And instead of this, they just sit in your drive and nobody takes a look at them. So in this video, I will show you how you can turn those transcripts into a clean FAQ library in Airtable, so your team will have instant access to those answers instead of digging through recordings. So let's take a look into our flow within n8n. And as you can see, again, this is a very simple flow. You know, I am a fan of simple flows because you can build them quite easily, but they have a very powerful impact. So the first thing that we are going to do is take a look at the demo, right? So let's imagine I have a CSV like this, right? So this just sits on my Google Drive, and this could be obviously in your, Zoom cloud recording directory, and they probably look like this, right? So it's a CSV, and you have a column which shows the speaker, then you have the start and end time, and then the transcript, which represents what everybody said at a certain time. Then we have a Airtable table, which looks like this, also extremely simple, but we want to make it reusable for your company and teammates, right? So we have a queue, which is the question column, then we have the answer column, then we have a date, and then you could include the source, so where this data is actually coming from, right? So that's already it. So let's take a look into Airtable and what this looks like. So I'm going to get the transcript, I'm going to extract what we have in that file, right? Then we are sending it to an AI model like GPT. Then we are going to pass on each and every one of those entries into a separate queue, into a separate record, and then we are sending it back into Airtable. So let's take a look at what this flow does. So now you can see that we have 200 items, right? And these are exactly the rows that we have just taken a look into, right? So these are the ones that are being passed on to the LLM right now. Now we have passed these on to the model itself, and now the flow is done. We have then split them out into a bunch of single items, and then we have added those items into, separate records. And let's take a look into Airtable right now. And here you can now see that this is what we're getting, right? So we have a question, what caused the order fulfillment delays? Then we have the answer, then what the date was of today, and then we have a beautiful Q&A database that we can just pass on to our team. All right, so let's take a look into each and every one of those nodes and how the whole flow works. I'm going to refresh the page. So the first thing that we are going to do, we are using a manual trigger, right? And obviously you can do this to your liking. So you can use a webhook for this. You can use a scheduler, right? If you know that at a certain time you will have a new transcript, because it might be a daily or a weekly session, and every time you have saved this transcript to your drive, you will basically start this flow. I'm going to use a manual trigger for now, and the first thing that I'm going to do is to get the transcript itself, which is saved on my Google Drive, right? So I'm going to open this up. This is now connected to my Google Drive. The resource is a file. I want to get a file and I want to download it, right? So it's if I close this, is the download file option. So if I look for the Google Drive node, then you can see if I download a file, then this is the action that I'm performing. Going to open the node again. And we have the operation download, and then I just picked the file specifically because this is the transcript that I wanted to use. And that's already it for this node. Next one is I extract from file, and if I look for this, then if you look for extract from file, then you can see that also in regards to the icon itself, what it is represented with, that you can see that it's already quite self-explanatory, because it gives you an idea of what exactly this does, which is to extract obviously data from a file, right? From a physical file. I'm going to open this up, and here you can see that the operation we are using is to extract from a CSV, and you can choose between different kinds of formats to your liking, and then the input binary field will be data. And if I execute the previous node, then you can see that by default n8n is giving us and is returning a binary field. And now you can also see in the tabs right here that we have a schema, a data, a table view, and a JSON view. And now in addition to this, because we were using the download file option from Google Drive, we also get a binary file, which is the actual file, and I can view and download the file as well. All right, so now what I'm using, or what I need, is to input the binary field and then the name of the input field containing the file data to be processed. Now by default, n8n is already naming this specific field data, and also by default it's naming this output of the previous node data, so there is no ambiguity and you can already work with these names. Next thing is that we already have our output, right? So we are extracting from that file each and every one of those records, right? And if we take a look into this file itself again, then you can see that it does exactly have 200 rows, and this is exactly what we are getting, right? Those 200 items from that file. And now you can already see also that we are getting the columns, right? So we have the speaker, the start time, the end time, and the transcript at that specific time, right? And this matches exactly what we have here. Going to close this again. And now what we are going to do is, because we want to pass on the whole information, so not each and every one, obviously, of those single records into our LLM in the next step, we want to aggregate the data first and then pass on the whole transcript as a whole, as a cohesive text into the LLM, so that it knows obviously also what the context is, right? It would make sense to pass on each and every one of those records. All right, so I'm going to open the aggregate node, and now these are the settings that I'm working with. So the aggregate will be all item data. So I want all of these data points, or all of these columns rather, that I have extracted from the previous files to be processed, right? Then the output field is going to be data again. So we can't use the default naming again. And what I want to include is every field that we have within here, right? We can choose if we want to have specific fields, right? So we can drag and drop this here and then separate it by comma, but this is not what I want, because I want the whole information, because everything of this is relevant. Then we can even add more fields, like including binaries, but this is also not suitable for our case, so we can leave this as is as well. And we're going to get into the next node itself, which is the OpenAI message a model node, right? So when I look for OpenAI, and then you have message an assistant as the second option, and then message a model, which is what we are using. So I'm going to open this up. And now this is connected to my OpenAI account, right? The resource that I want to work with is a text, and then the operation is message a model. The model that I chose was GPT-5 mini, and you can obviously switch this to your liking. And then I basically have two prompts. The first one is a system prompt. The second one is a user prompt. Now let's take a look into the system prompt. And here you can see that it's quite a simple prompt, which just says you are an assistant that extracts clear FAQs from meeting transcripts, right? Return only a JSON array where each entry has a question and an answer. If no relevant info is found, return an empty array. And then we are basically telling it how it should exactly structure the JSON that we want to be output. And this is exactly what we have here. So we have a code example, and this is the question, and this is the answer. And these are all the individual parameters and all the individual objects which represent one QA pair, right? And that's already it. I'm going to close this, jump into the next prompt, which is just the user prompt, where I am passing on the whole transcript. And now you can see why we aggregated this. And then the task is convert the transcript into 5 to 10 FAQ entries, right? And obviously you can adjust this also to your specific use case. So let's run the previous node again, so that we basically will go on step by step. I'm going to execute the aggregate node. And now you can see that out of those 200 items, I just got one item, right? And if we take a look into the output itself, then now you can see that this is basically one whole data block, right? This is an array, and each and every one of those objects, and you can take a look at the JSON itself as well. Each of every one of those objects is basically representing a record, is basically representing a row from this specific file, right? And this is what we're passing on to our LLM. All right, so let's execute the LLM node again. I'm going to open this up. And now you can see what this looks like, right? And now you can also see what the LLM is going to be passed on to. So if I open up the user prompt again, then now you can see we have the transcript, and what we are using is the JSON data. This would be this very array. And then we are using a function which is called toJSON_string, because if I would not use this and just drag and drop it right here, then you can see what this would look like, right? So it's not parsed yet. So what I'm doing is I'm going to hit dot, and then I'm getting a suggestion of different kinds of functions that I can use, and the one that I want to use is called toJSON_string. And this is what it does. It converts the array to a JSON string, the same as JavaScript's JSON stringify, which is a quite popular function. All right, so what I'm going to do again is to JSON string, and now you can see that it's basically parsing the whole information so that it is readable for the LLM, right? And that's already it for this one. So I'm going to run this again, and now the results are finished. So let's take a look into the node itself. And this is now the output that we got, right? And now you can basically see what it does. We can take a look into the schema. So within the content object that you can see right here, we have our actual answers. So there's a first item, and then we have the second item, and so on and so forth. And then we have a Q and answer pair for each and every one of those FAQs, right, that we can pass on to the next node. So I'm going to close this, and now what we are going to do is we are using a split node. So if you look for split, then you can see that it says turns a list inside items into separate items. And now this is basically, and you can also see this from a visual standpoint, which is very interesting, that this is basically the opposite of what we did with the aggregate node, right? Because before we wanted to have all the items we have extracted from the file itself into one item that we are able to pass it on as a whole text, as a whole string into our model. But now what we want is to split out the information that we got from the model into separate items again, so that we can basically pass on each and every one of those into separate rows again, because now they are different kinds of Q&A pairs, right? So this is what we're using the split out node for. So if I open this up, now I have to decide on the fields to split out, and you can also do this just by drag and dropping. And you have to be aware of the fact that what we want is to split out each and every one of those items, because they themselves contain those pairs, right? So if I drag this into this field right here, then it just says message content, and then we have those square brackets, which is fine for now. Now we don't want to include any other fields, but we want to execute the whole step. And now you can see that we get clean separated Q&A pairs, right? Because it says it's 10 items that we got out of those. And if we take a look into the table itself, then you can see that now we're getting separate items for each and every one of those responses. I'm going to close this one again, and now we're already at the very last node. Going to open this up, and we are using the create a record node from Airtable, right? So if I close this and if I look for Airtable, these are the actions that I can perform, and I want to create a record. So this is the node that I'm using. Going to close this and open the create a record node again. This is connected to my Airtable account. The resource is a record. The operation is create. The base that I want to use is called demo, and you can see this is this one here. And the table that I want to use is called FAQs. And this is exactly the one that I chose here. The mapping to column mode is manually. After this, I do get the selection of the columns that I have in Airtable, which are just QA, the date, and then the source, right? And now I'm just drag and dropping the previous information from the node before, right? And you can already see that this is done. So what caused the order fulfillment delays? And this would be the answer from the value that we got before. Now, one final thing, the date that I'm using, obviously you can get the data from your transcript as well if this has been recorded, but I'm using today's date, so I'm using an expression which is called now, and then I'm again converting this into ISO format, because within my Airtable table, this is the format that I chose as well. So if I open up this column, then you can see that I just called it date, and the data type is a date as well, and the date format is ISO, and I have included the time using the 24-hour format. Right? Back in n8n, I have to adhere to this fact, and I have to be wary of the fact that I have to match those different kinds of format, right? And that's already it. Now I could include the source if there is a URL from your drive, right? You can use this, obviously. I just hard-coded this in, just called it data PDF, and this is already what's happening. I'm going to execute this step as well. And now this is done as well. So let's take a look into the schema. So we have an ID that was created automatically. We have the Q&A, and then the date, and then also the source. And if we take a look back into our table, and you can see that we now have the additional rows right here, right? These were like 9 or 10 before, and now we have almost 20, and this is the data that we have. And now you can basically do with this information whatever you want, right? You can find a way how you can provide this data to your teammates immediately, and this is a very efficient way how you can structure your data and actually have this used by your team members. Now you might think that, all right, we do have AI note takers, right? So, and these are pretty powerful. However, obviously you also know that most of the time they just give you summaries and nobody really reads them. So this is a really efficient way how you can extract the relevant information information from those transcripts directly, and then also in regards to ownership and control, right? So this will stay within your ecosystem, whatever you're using, right? And you are not bound to the note taker's cloud, right? All right, so this is already it. So if you found this video helpful, then I would highly appreciate if you subscribe to this channel and also liked and shared this video. And then also I am building Script AI School, which is exactly where we are handling these kinds of topics, right? So you can automate your operational processes with or without sometimes using AI, right? And if you're not familiar with n8n or not too much, then we will get into the n8n basics. We will take a look into AI agents and we'll deeply dive into everything concerning them. We will jump into RAG systems, you know, how you can basically use your company's knowledge, right? And then have this accessed by your team members. We will take a look into scraping and everything there is. All right, this is already it. Thanks a lot for your attention and hope to see you next time. Bye.